Hello everyone, welcome to another video in this full stack Flutter development series. We continue to create our food order in backend, and in this video we'll be looking at creating our sign up use case since we have already created our sign in use case. So let us jump right into it. And so within our use case folder, we will quickly create our sign up use case. So the sign up use case is pretty similar to the sign in use case. Default class sign up use case. And in our constructor, we will have our two dependencies, which is our repository and our password service. So IAuth repository and also our password service. So password service, this is our iPassword service. So we'll have those as our dependencies. And then we'll create our execute method. So our async execute. This method will accept all the data necessary to create a user. So the name, the auth type, we have the email, and also the password. And this method should return a promise of type string, which is the user ID that is created. So to create the user, we'll use the repository. So this auth repository, and we'll check if the email exists. So we'll find the email. If it does not exist, then it will return a reject promise. So we're gonna catch that error here, that promise, and say null. So if the user doesn't exist, the auth repository will return a fail or a promise reject, and we're gonna catch that error and so pass null to our user object. And so we're gonna check if the user object is not null, so that if it exists, then we know that this user already is in the system, so we can return a promise reject with the message user already exists. Else we can then create that user. So a user ID using our repository again, our auth repository. We add the information. So the name, the email, password, name, email, password, and the type, or auth type as we have it. But for the password, I'm not going to pass this password string, but I am going to use the password service to create a hash of that password. So the hash is what will be saved to the database, and after the user is added, then we can return the user ID. So this is our sign up use case. And for sign up use case, now we'll quickly add it to our controller. So inside of entry, we have our auth controller. Now we need our sign up. Sign up use case. Now we need that as a dependency. We're just gonna pass it in here. So sign up use case of type sign up use case. Then we will just set the instance here to sign up use case. Well, so instead of sign in, it should be sign up. There we have it. And then we'll have, I am just gonna copy and paste this method here. And I'm going to call it sign up instead. And from there, I'll create what's necessary for the user to sign up here. So we need all the information here from the request body. So we need the name, we need the email, we need the password, and we need the auth type. So we need all of that from the request body. Then we're gonna call the sign up use case, pass in the name, sign up. So sign up use case, sign up, execute, sign up of type, sign up, sign up, sign up use case, import that. So now we need to enter our name, the auth type, name, auth type, email, then password. Then that is all we need to do to get our sign up in our controller working. So inside of our auth router, we will now configure our sign up route. So here we're gonna say route up as a post method, sign up, and this sign up will call request response controller sign up. pass in the request and the response object. So now we need to inject our sign up use case here inside of our controller. So sign up use case, a new instance of sign up use case, and it accepts the auth repository and also the password service. So then we inject sign in and sign up here with our password service, and there we have our controller. So now to test our sign up use case, I am going to go to my router spec and I'm going to write a integration test to add a user directly to the database. So I'm just going to copy and paste that, and I'm going to say that it should create a user and return token. So whenever a user is added to the database, whenever a user signs up, then a token should be created and returned to that user to be used for authentication. So sign up, I am going to create the necessary fields. After creating those fields, I am going to add those fields as a part of the body of the request. So email, password, auth type, and also the name. So I am expecting a 200, and also that the token should not be empty if everything works as it should. And also, first let me save this. And also a record should be created in our database. So if I run that, so there we have our test passing, and if I check my database now, then the record should be in the database. Actually, the record will not be in the database since I'm using a fake repository here, but it shows that our test is passing and the record is being added to our fake repository, and a token is also being returned. So there we have our sign up and our sign in use cases. But for our inside of our router, we want to add validation to our routes so that the user will get some kind of error if the appropriate information is not passed along with the request object. And those validations will be run first as express middleware before our sign in and sign up method is called. So in order to create those validations, I am going to install what is called I'm going to use express validator. So npm I express validators. After that is installed, I am going to create a folder here in my auth folder, and I'm going to call it helpers. And under helpers, I am going to create a file, validators. And inside here, I'm going to use the express validator to validate my request objects before executing my use cases. So I'm going to import body and also validation result. This is coming from express validators or validator. I think I installed the wrong should be express validator. So let me install that. So right, so it should be express validator without an S. Now I'm going to export some functions. So first I'm going to say export my signup validation rules. So these are the rules that apply to my signup validation. And the rules basically you return an array of rules using express validator. So how it works is that you use the body function from express validator and you say, okay, the body should have a certain field. So in this case, it should have a name field. And the error message, if this is missing, is that I want to return a message that says name is required. And then you use the functions from express validator to validate this field. So in this case, there's a function called not empty. So I'm basically saying that the name field in the body should not be empty. And I'm going to also validate the email field. I'm going to say invalid email if there's an error. The validators that I'm applying is that it must not be empty, and also it must be an email and normalize or sanitize the email. So that's a validation for the email. And for the password, I'm going to say that password, for the error, I'm going to return password is required with a minimum of 5 characters. I'm going to set a minimum on the password. So again, for the validators, it must not be empty, but the password must not be empty if this is conditional. So I'm gonna say if password must not be empty if the auth type that is passed, if that type equals email. So if you're signing up with an email, then a password is required. Otherwise, the password is not required. And then for the length, I'm gonna say it must be a minimum of 5 characters. So that's it for the password. But I want to add one also for my auth type. So auth type is required, and this must not be empty. So those are the validation rules for my sign up. Now I'm also gonna export another function called validate that will execute these rules and check to see if the body is validated correctly. So for this validate function, I will need the request object, I'll need the response object. This is the express response and the express request, and also the next function from express. So next function, and inside here I'm going to say errors equal validation result from, and I'm going to pass in the request. So you pass in the request to this function from express validators, and it will validate the request based on the rules that we have configured. So I'm going to say if there are no errors, that is, it is empty. And what I want to do is return the next function. So in other words, execute the next function. And the next function in this case will be our use case from the controller. Else, if there are errors, I'm gonna extract those errors. So extracted error should be an array. Just gonna say type any. Errors, convert this to an array. And here's important that the only first error is set to true, or else for some reason express validator returns the error multiple times. So if there's no email, it's gonna return email multiple times. So we need the only first to get only one instance of the error. So, and I'm going to map that to, gonna say extracted errors, and I'm going to push to it each error. So push JSON error parameter that throws the error along with the error message. So that's extracted error. After I've extracted the error, then I say response, set the status to error status, and set the JSON response to errors. And I'm going to pass the extracted errors. Should be a JSON. So there we have our validation rule set up for our sign up route. So now here inside of our router, what we need to do is to add our validation as middlewares. So here inside of sign up, before we execute our controller, the sign up method in our controller, what we need to do is to say execute sign up rules first, and then call the next function validate to validate those rules. So we call this function to set up the rules, then call validate to validate the rules, and if everything passes, then we call our controller to execute our sign up method. So these are screaming out for implicit types, so I'll just say this must be an express request. And this must be an express response. And there we have our sign up being validated. So if I should test this now, back to our auth spec and should run a test. So for our test, we are testing for errors. So we are making a request to our sign up route, and we are passing in an empty email. And we are saying that we expect the result to be 422 and that errors should not be empty. So if we run that test, so now we have a passing test. So we can have confidence that our validation rules are working as they should. And again, if we should run this test to create the user with all the fields accurate, then again it passes, show that the validation rules are working as they should. Inside of our auth controller spec, our auth router spec, everything is now working as it should. So we can have confidence in that. So thank you guys for checking out this video. We have created our sign up use case. We have tested it. We have added validation for our sign up use case. And so in the next video, we'll continue to build out our back end, and we'll create our express app so that we can execute it and test it from Postman or some other service like that. But see you in the next video, guys, and thank you for watching. And remember that the code is on GitHub. so you can check it out from there.